So I think we'll start listening to David, if you're ready. I think that
Thanks,
works.
and hi to everybody. So what that tells me, Magnus, is we've got a pretty experienced and sophisticated audience. So let's make this a discussion rather than me pretending I know more than anybody else, which is almost certainly not true. I do, however, have a fairly long career, which means I'm quite old, and it's a rich and varied one. And I started life in the corporate world, always leading high growth ventures. And in the last 15 years or so, I've been combining investments, first as an angel, then as a fund partner, GP, but also venture building. But I didn't really know it was venture building until the phrase was used, and I kept thinking, that sounds really cool. I wonder what it is. And I figured out I'd been doing it once or twice. So we are a fund. So this slide is simply to remind me to tell everybody that we're not giving any advice here, any investment advice. So with that being said, what I do want to do is just spend 10 minutes or so talking about what I've done and what we're doing at Deeptech Labs, but only as a kind of platform in order to talk about three major things. What makes, what differentiates a good venture builder from one that's less good. I thought it was probably quite useful, but please put your hand up and tell me if it's not, to make a distinction between creating ventures in the wild versus doing so within some kind of corporate world. And then I think it's quite fascinating how investors should look at venture building, both in terms of perhaps investing in venture studios or in new ventures to be created to order, but also perhaps later stage investing in companies that have been through a venture building process rather than a standalone one. So I should have some kind of real-time voting mechanism, but if I can just see faces. So if you really don't want to talk about this stuff, just sort of wave your arms or turn off or something like that. Otherwise, I'll just carry on. I really would like to make this interactive. So if you could please put hands up, and if I don't see everybody on the screen, Magnus, if you wouldn't mind just interfering and telling me to stop to introduce a discussion. So hopefully that makes some sense. Um, a little bit about me, as I mentioned. I've had the pleasure, luxury, if you like, to have worked across a whole variety of different industries in very different sizes of businesses, using different business models, different technologies, different markets, etc. And have been really lucky enough along the way to work with some good people that's enabled me to claim at least a few career highlights. Um, from a founder startup perspective, I was able at one stage to build a new venture um, with a consortium of UK retail banks. I had the unfair advantage of having access to all of the UK's payments transaction data as a core asset. And we did some pretty cool things. We actually had a lot of different use cases, but we focused on one. We drove it out pretty quickly and sold it 18 months later for just around 100 million US. And that's one of those moments in life where you spend the rest of your life thinking you shouldn't have done that, and what would have happened if we'd have had the chance just to keep at it. But I'll leave that one for another time. I did venture building within a consulting firm. We stood up 12 new businesses with a variety of different outcomes. Some were exited, some gathered dust on a in a brochure, and others created quite a lot of core value for the business as well. And they've also run quite a lot of quite large business units and high growth entities within various corporates as well, in mostly with a worldwide reach, but they're UK and US quoted companies. And along the way have somehow been involved in around 100, well, about 110 different investments in early stage. So I guess I've seen quite a lot of different things in different models. And so what I'm going to try and do is share some of that experience. Um, Deeptech Labs, for those of you that don't know us, we were founded in Cambridge in 2021, so right at the heat of COVID, and we were set up to help deep tech spin-outs in Cambridge become much more investable. And fundamentally, we're designed to help really good technological breakthroughs and founders raise more money faster. And Cambridge is obviously clearly one of the most established, credible, successful startup hubs or innovation hubs in the world, but certainly outside of the US. But even so, it was felt that an awful lot of value was being left in the lab, if you like, or on the table. And I think deep tech companies in particular suffer from having so much optionality in terms of which markets they should operate in, which business models they should pursue, where they fit in the value chain. By definition, their technologies are novel, and finding brand new ways of doing things isn't necessarily helpful when you're working with established supply chains and value chains and things like that. So we work very actively using a network of over 600 absolute rock stars, to be honest. And we're super fortunate to have access to exited founders of established companies like Arm, to more recent rock stars in Darktrace, and companies like Magic Pony or Graphcore or Imagination Technologies. So crossing all sorts of technologies. Wonderful, some Rick Belusa out of Microsoft, just folks from all sorts of walks of life. So mostly exited founders as a general archetype, but also functional experts, technical experts, folks that are rock stars in product or in talent and things like that. And we created in the first instance a 90-day program to help founders get a deep immersion in all things strategic and operational. So we help them figure out that strategic North Star, help them figure out those things like the target market and business model and things like that. But then really help them define what really needs to happen when. Obviously, not everything needs to happen all at once. So figuring out, the talent roadmaps and the technology and product roadmaps, and even, if you take the fundamental challenge of which markets you operate in, so many founders kick off a business thinking it's a great advantage that their technologies can be applied in lots of different markets. But obviously, if you put an investor hat on, that feels terribly scattergun, and it feels unlikely that someone's going to dominate a market if they're not really focused on it, if they're trying to do many things. So, the phasing of the market penetration as well is key to some of the things we do. And then just so you know, we have a demo day at the end of this course each time, or each program each time, which is remarkably well attended. We have around 350 investors each time round. Here are some pictures of, I think, an event we held probably at Jesus College, Cambridge, to see the 5 companies that participate in each program. So we've been doing this for 3-4 years now. 50 companies have been through. We have over 600 experts. So each program, the founders get exposed to 60 or 70 different experts who give them an absolute grilling and support, but challenge. Some turn around and give them money as well, a lot of introductions. But it seems to be a really well-regarded and successful program. We believe that companies who go through the program raise more money faster, probably to the extent of around 20%. So it's proven good stuff. So as we're now doing this as a service for other regions, other areas, and starting soon in other countries as well. And later this year specifically, we'll be starting to launch the first of 15 new venture builds that we're doing ourselves, which is super exciting. I should mention my partner in the firm is our CEO is Miles Kirby. Miles was 20 years in the Valley with Qualcomm. He set up Qualcomm Ventures over here in Europe. He also set up a big fund for Allianz over here, AV8. And so he and I and the rest of the team have a lot of experience in commercializing super deep tech and taking it to market. And we were invited to apply that into creating some of our own ventures as well as supporting other ones. So interesting to learn from others on this story as well. So, I don't suppose there's anything really new in the approach that's outlined on the table here. As I mentioned, if we're embarking on building out a new venture, we're very fortunate to have a really broad exposure. We've seen lots of different types of technologies being taken into lots of different markets in lots of different ways. So we see a lot of great stuff, and sometimes we can learn from other people's errors as well. But this network of expertise is quite phenomenal. And sometimes these folks are just now in a pluralistic lifestyle where they invest, they do some stuff, they dabble in lots of different things. Sometimes we have folks who are perhaps maybe they've just had an exit, they're starting to come up for air, see what's around, and they are looking for new opportunities as well. So we're taking an EIR or an XIR approach, expert in residence approach to building out new ventures, working with university systems for available IP, talking to other founders who might be very early in their own tenure, to see if we can buddy up, or creating new things ourselves. Often in corporates, there might be some frustrated, brilliant founders who haven't yet found their niche as well. And in fact, by the way, we have quite a lot of corporates coming to us to help them with their own innovation and venture building activities as well. So what we are doing is spending perhaps more time than certainly I would have done in the past in iterating and creating that ideation process. We're spending much more time thinking through lots and lots of different options. Um, you know, Research is so much easier these days. We're really fortunate to have relationships with, over 300 investors, around 100 CVCs as well. So we're able to road test ideas really quite quickly and validate whether there is demand. So we actually will only move into the actual setting up of a company and forming the team and solidifying the investment into that, which includes external money, quite long after we've been through the ideation process. And then we'll scale the business from there. With a dedicated team. We're also very lucky that through our existing activities over the years, we have the support and sponsorship of a lot of really well-established service providers, law firms like Mishcon de Reya, the likes of Google Cloud, AWS, HSBC Innovation Banking, and others. So we've got a pre-formed set of accelerators, if you like, in the form of process and system support, which is very useful. So when we look at companies and the fundamentals of what makes a good company, these obviously still hold true to our own ventures that we're creating. So can the technological breakthrough or the new business model or whatever it might be have a major impact on a really large and growing and attractive market? So, but you have to be able to make a big difference. We absolutely believe that a great CEO and a great team is fundamental to success. I should mention a friend of mine at Sequoia, and he told me the extent to which they really, really did focus on the CEO and how hard they reference the CEO. And maybe because of my own corporate background, honestly, I sometimes my core belief is that people are interchangeable. You can swap them in and out. But actually, the more and more that I've invested, the more that I've seen, the more crucial I think it is the CEO is the absolute setter of the pace and the tone of the business. They can attract great talent. They can pivot the business with great leadership and conviction. They can attract board members, investors, customers. They really are crucial to success. So that's probably something that we focus on more than we once did. And then actually another Sequoiaism is around the super trend, the tailwind that's created by something that means that the afterburners are really going to go on this business. It's not a normal business. And for them to be an outlier in the fund, to return the whole fund, honestly, it's got to be an incredible business rather than just a great one. So how does venture building help? Well, sometimes I think having that unfair advantage of early stage funding, the surety of the team around you, the experience that comes, the network of relationships is somehow really different. And I'll contrast this to a university spin out or to a startup in the wild. Um, and I think there's much more that can be done to enable the founding team to be much, much more focused on, maybe finalizing their technology, but really finding that product market fit and helping them better understand what good looks like. Even more so, if you like, than even with the very best accelerators around. So we'll see. Hopefully, that doesn't sound as though I'm criticizing myself too much there. The type of funding can be much more flexible and released, and that sometimes means not too much money too early as well, and just crowding in a lot more expertise and knowledge and know-how to make sure that the team is taking shortcuts where it's possible, but spending more slow time where it's really necessary as well. There are things, as I mentioned earlier, around systems and processes and service provider relationships and facilities. Um, I, I personally don't believe that makes such a big difference. It's not like there isn't optionality in terms of office space or law firms or marketing firms or cloud compute capability, or whatever it might be. So, I'd expect any founding team worth their salt to be able to navigate through those things quite quickly. But they can help. Maybe a few moments on venture building in a corporate environment. So I've done this a few times now. Maybe I'll pick an example rather than read off the slides. So maybe I mentioned that I was invited once to have a look at commercializing this big data set, which was the UK's banking data, which is clearly a very sensitive data set. There are a lot of security issues around that and a lot of sensitivity as to how the data might be used, not least in the context of data privacy and how people might expect their data to be processed and leveraged. And working with an existing corporate function, in this instance, one that was backed by, I think it was 14 UK retail banks, brought with it a lot of existing corporate behaviors, know-how, expertise, culture. And you can imagine in operating systems such as that, and by the way, it included the ATM network, security, reliability, resilience was foremost in the mind of everybody in the business. And, the agility, the novel technologies that were required to introduce, machine learning, training algorithms, and to dabble and to experiment and everything like that was not first nature or even second nature to anybody else in the business. And so we were trying to create, experiment, and maybe just to put this into context, this was 2014, so 11 years ago. I suspect even now it would be deeply challenging, but at that stage, there was deep distrust of any open source tools or techniques or different approaches. Agile technology approaches were alien to everybody in the organization. And the reason I mention those things is not to criticize my colleagues at the time, because they were truly world-class people, was to say that when you're creating a new venture associated with an existing corporate, sometimes what you're doing, antibodies are created. And they're not deliberate. That may happen, of course. Politics may come into play. But you're often cutting across existing initiatives, people's career aspirations. There's a not invented here mindset that comes to the fore really quite quickly. And that's not including a whole bunch of just real things that are very different and challenging. For example, those of you that have ever backed a startup founder will want to reward them in a way that means if they're super successful, so are you, but they can, obviously have great ownership in the business and become very wealthy overnight, or in the 8 to 10 to 12 to 14 years it takes to realize the value of a startup. But in some corporates, that idea that a founder in a startup could earn more than the CEO just is not acceptable. Equally, some people running a startup in a corporate environment or a venture building a corporate environment has to be able to operate still with the corporate. There may be internal and external customers and suppliers. It may be that they're reporting to a sub board or a committee within the corporate, and they have to be able to speak the same language and understand the approach to risk, or whatever it might be, or compliance for that matter. So those folks often like the idea of a corporate-like salary, which will probably look a bit odd to an incoming investor. So all of these things come into play: career pathways, talent, reward, everything else. And of course, one of the other main challenges, certainly I experienced in a number of these things that I've done in the past, is sometimes the internal sponsor changes. It might be budgets change and fancy new shiny ideas suddenly become less important than running the core business. Or it may be executives change, or they come to the end of an earnout period, or something like that happens as well. And all of a sudden you can be left high and dry. And I hope that translates into all languages on the call today. I think fundamentally for me, I love working at the very leading edge of technologies. And if you're building a business in a corporate environment, it is often the case that you need to generate returns and make a meaningful contribution to the business in a relatively short period of time, maybe within something like a 3-year period. And, if you're building a genuine deep tech business with very novel technologies in a market that either doesn't exist today or isn't used to adopting your technologies, it's not unreasonable for that to be a 10, 12 plus year return. And that's just not relevant to an existing management team of a corporate public company, unless they are absolutely clear on everything they're doing in the medium term, and have the very best strategic long-term interests of the company at heart. And I promise you, I've seen some truly great leaders, but not many of them are looking at a 12 to 15 time horizon for their tenure. So I guess in summary around corporate venturing, I think you can absolutely benefit from some great advantages that can be provided to you. Frankly, just availability of resources, space, legal, technical supports can be absolutely fantastic. Things like data assets, customers are just unbelievable. The ability to validate market demand very quickly, the brand gets you into places, but there are often crosswinds, there is interference, and there are very practical misalignment issues that can come to the fore and make this very, very difficult. So hopefully that will stimulate some conversation. I just wanted to touch very briefly, finally, on an investor perspective. And actually, when I first started looking at this, I was thinking of investors, VCs, looking at investing in companies that had started off as a venture build, and sometimes they can be deeply attractive, but things like the cap table can be off-putting. The venture builder, as well as the founding teams and maybe the IP owner, can have perhaps too large a position on the cap table, too much ownership, and maybe sometimes the founding teams and the employees get a bit squeezed out of that. So I think that's one thing to look for from everybody's perspective. But the more I thought about this, the more I was thinking about the challenges facing VCs and GPLPs at the moment. And I think in today's environment where returns are difficult to come by, all sorts of risks taking place, there are some real advantages perhaps in investing in venture studios themselves, or in having ventures built for you as an investor quite early. And we're seeing more demand for this at the moment, which is driving our own activities as well. And clearly, I think there are some very, very clear advantages in venture building. They're listed out here, but actually, judging by the audience, I don't think I need to tell you how to suck eggs on this one, but perhaps we can talk about a few of them later as well. So, just to recap then, I think there are just incredible opportunities to build new ventures. Obviously, the advances in technology across a whole raft of things over the last 20 years or so has enabled each and every one of us to set up a new business much more easily than we could and should have done in the past. There's going to be a lot of wastage created that way. But I think by combining the very best ideas with the very best teams, and helping them with lots of challenge and support from leading investors and experts to take a shortcut to the right answer, raise more money quickly, I think there's a fantastic opportunity. So hopefully I've been successful in sharing a few ideas, a few thoughts, a few personal experiences, and hopefully now we can, I'm not sure, Magnus, whether you want to have now Oscar and Robin talk and we all come back and discuss, or whether we should take questions.
I'll give you one. I don't know if it's a question really, but Jane is actually on the in the participation here, Jane Wallerud, and she has some. Jane, can you unmute and share your views directly to David, because I like them and they were relevant.
I'm scared.
So I've done my best to build within a corporate environment occasionally, and I found it difficult because it's really hard to get decisions you need fast enough. You can't move quickly because the legal team, for instance, needs to review, and the owner organization risks their brand if we go out and do something stupid. And almost all of us startups, we go out and do something stupid rather often, so they don't want us to do that. And it turns into a not fast enough moving environment. And the other thing is, when it starts to work and I start pulling top talent from other parts of the company, the talent flocks to me, right? But then the other managers are not at all happy, and they take revenge. And I found that also very difficult. And this is not just once, I'm sorry. I found that also very difficult. So I thought I have occasionally, a few times now, built independently and then sold in trade sales, right? And then when you need to sell, it's when you have something that's obviously got product market fit, that works, that scales, and you need the distribution channels. Then there's often a fair number of bidders that can take the business and scale it. It seemed to me to be a better way of working. Yeah, but then I suppose you don't need the internal data of the mother company, for instance.
Yeah, Jane, I have absolute sympathy with each of those experiences, but even when you talk about the talent flocking to you, it's not necessarily the right talent either, with the right culture or the right mindset as well.
The best they had in the company.
Yeah. And I remember once, I won't name names on this one, but I walked in, we had shared offices, we had a carved out space, and they were quite cool, so that was probably quite nice. But I walked in one day and found this, it was like 18 people sitting around a meeting room with 2 of my team members. I think I had 6 people in the team. So a third of my team was in a meeting with 18 people, and I poked my head in and said, "Hey, everybody, what are you all doing? And it was a 3-day risk meeting about our business. I mean, there was literally months of effort going into this. Other instances, you know, I think what is critical is executive sponsorship, and I've been lucky enough with the ventures I've built with corporates to have very strong executive support. You can't always go to mum and dad and you know, ask for forgiveness or for permission, but they can clearly unblock things for you. But there really are obstacles, and in one model I was working with in a partner. The parent company was a partnership, and with clearly well established reward mechanisms that were fundamental to the eminence, the autonomy, and the reward systems for everybody in the business. And they just didn't tie in to what we needed to do, and it was never broken. It never really worked as a result. But I like you. I like the idea of it being slightly deniable as an adjunct, somehow benefiting from all of the things, but maybe having a different brand, and maybe working with a third party, a venture studio, is a nice way of doing that as well. So it can be created and incubated in a safer environment, a protected environment. But if it is going to be integrated back into the core, then you know you can't allow it to go too far away. You know, it does have to operate for the necessary stakeholders. But it's definitely a tough gig, and I think I've seen everything that you've described. I'm sure other people have.
Great. I think we have to stop there, David, for now, and move forward. Hopefully, we have a little bit of time in the end that we can continue chatting with each other. So thank you so much, Dave, again.